Welcome to Carleton's Math Corner. Today we're going to continue our study on parallel and perpendicular lines. At this time, please make sure that you have your notebook, something to write with, as well as your vocabulary packet. Our target today is I can write an equation in slope-intercept form for a line that is perpendicular to a given equation and that passes through a given point. First of all, let's just review that perpendicular lines are two lines that have opposite slopes and they will intersect at a 90-degree angle. So if you look at these two equations that represent two lines, they have slopes that are opposite of each other. They have opposite sign and they are the reciprocal of each other. So slope-intercept form. Let's remind you that y equals mx b is our equation that we use for slope-intercept form. The m stands for slope, the b is the y-intercept, and then the x and the y are, well, they represent a coordinate, a point on that line. So let's look at four different problems. The first problem is y equals y equals 8x plus 4. So we have one line, and what we need to do is create another line that passes through the -4, 3, and is perpendicular to that line. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're going to look at, first of all, the slope of this line. The slope is 8. Now, perpendicular lines, remember, are opposite sign and reciprocal. So remember, first of all, this is a positive 8, so our opposite sign would be negative. And now we have to do the reciprocal of that. Well, just refresh our memory, this is really 8 over 1. So the reciprocal of it would be 1 over 8. So I'm going to actually type 1/8. And then I'm going to keep the x, but this time I'm going to put plus b because we don't know what the y-intercept is for this perpendicular line. Now our next step is we are going to plug in the x and the y. And so 3 goes in for y. And then the -1/8, we're going to use that in just a moment. But notice it's next to x, so that means times. And then -4 goes in there. Plus b. And now we need to solve for this. So we have -1/8 times -4. And really this is -4 over 1. Okay, so technically a negative times a negative would be positive, so we get +1/2 plus b. Now in order to solve this, remember we're doing inverse operations. So instead of plus a half, I'm going to subtract a half. And so 3 minus a half, and I like to do this on both sides, but 3 minus a half would be 2 1/2, or we could write that as 5/2. I like to keep it as just a fraction, but you are welcome to keep it, as a mixed number. Y-intercept can be a mixed number, but slope may not be a mixed number. It has to stay as a fraction. So our slope that is perpendicular to this is -1/8 x. So y equals -1/8 x, and then plus 5/2. Okay, so let's look at the next one. We have y equals 2x minus 9. Well, if I look at the slope is +2. So remember, we got to start with opposite slope. So I'm going to change this. There we go. So y equals opposite of +2 would be negative. And then opposite of 2 would be 1/2. And then we put plus b. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to plug in the 10 and the 6 to figure out what b is, or what my y-intercept is. So 6 would go in for y, then 10 will go in for the x plus the b. And if I solve this, y equals, and if I take a half of 10, that's 5, but it will be -5 because of that negative there. And so now I need to solve this. Negative 5 plus what is 6? Well, do the opposite, plus 5. And so that means b is equal to 11. So my final equation is y equals negative 1/2 x. Let me make this a little bit smaller. X plus 11. Nice job. Okay, let's look at the number 3. So we have 1/3 as our slope. So the opposite of that is negative 3. And so we're going to start off with that. And now we're going to plug in, again, the negative 8 and the negative 3. And remember, this is always times right here because the x is next to the negative 3 plus b. And let's solve this. So we have negative 3 equals 24 plus b. And the opposite of positive 24 is minus. So we're going to do minus 24. So negative 3 minus 24. B is negative 27. Nice job. So our final equation then, and I'm going to actually try to make this smaller. There we go. So our final equation would be, okay, I guess it doesn't want to work with me. Our final equation would be negative 3x and then minus 27. I can make that one smaller. Okay, let's look at this last one. Now this one is, first of all, it's not in slope-intercept form, and we need to make sure that it's always in slope-intercept form before we even start, finding an opposite slope. So in order to get this in slope-intercept form, I need the y by itself. So I need to get rid of this 10x. And so in order to do that, I need to subtract 10x. And if I subtract it on the other side, what happens is now I have y equals negative 10x plus 3. And my y is by itself. I mean, if there was a number in front of the y, then I would have to get rid of that too. And that in order to get rid of that, I would have to divide everything by that number. But in this case, I just have a 1 in front of the y, and that's perfect. So now I have an equation that I can work with. And now I can start by finding a slope that is opposite of negative 10. And the opposite of that would be, well, positive, and it would be 1/10. And so now I can plug in that 30 and that negative 2. So negative 2 goes in for y, and then 30 goes in for the x, and then plus b. And so now, I'm going to make this smaller so I can fit it here. Negative 2 equals, and 1/10 of 30 is 3 plus b. And so we have 3 plus what is negative 2, and that would be 5, negative 5. And so my final equation is y equals, and I better make this smaller, it's not going to fit, 1/10 x minus 5. Nice job, guys. A lot of work, I know. Hang in there. You can do this one. I know you can. At this time, will you please try those 4 problems? Remember, you're always trying to find opposite slope, so opposite sign and reciprocal. Then you plug in the 2 for y and the negative 6 for x and solve for b. Thank you so much for joining me at Carleton's Math Corner, and I can't wait to see you again. Have a great day. Bye.